Of all the practices whispered in the halls of modern self-improvement, few are as ancient, as controversial, or as shrouded in mystique as semen retention. It is a concept that often evokes snickers from the uninitiated, dismissed as a primitive superstition or an exercise in pointless asceticism. Yet, to those who have walked its path, it is something far more profound. It is not merely about abstaining from a physical act. It is the deliberate cultivation of a state of being. It is, in its ultimate expression, the forging of what can only be described as the king's presence. This is not the presence of a tyrant, who rules through fear and loud proclamations. Nor is it the bluster of the insecure, masking inner frailty with external noise. The king's presence is an aura of unshakable composure, a magnetic quietude that commands respect without demanding it. It is a man rooted so deeply in his own essence that the world naturally orients itself around him. Semen retention, in this context, is the foundational alchemy that transmutes base instinct into sovereign power. The king archetype has been distorted in modern culture. Too often, it is portrayed as domination, entitlement, or external power. But in psychological and spiritual traditions, a king is not defined by what he rules over, but how he rules. His power is internal first. His presence commands respect, not because he demands it, but because he emanates worthiness and gravitas. In Jungian psychology, the king archetype represents order, vision, and blessing. He is productive, generative, and connected to something greater than himself. His presence stabilizes the environment. When a king speaks, his voice carries weight because he is rooted, clear, and restrained, not reactive. And this is where semen retention enters. In the modern world, most men experience sexual energy as an ungoverned force, one that pulls them compulsively into gratification, escapism, and fragmentation. Without mastery, they leak their power, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. They become subjects of their own impulses, not rulers over their inner kingdom. Sexual energy is not merely biological. It is the most potent creative force available to a man. This energy, when retained and transformed, becomes libido that fuels ambition, charisma, mental clarity, and spiritual insight. In traditional Taoist and yogic teachings, it is referred to as Jing or Ajas, a sacred substance that governs vitality, longevity, and spiritual potential. To expel this energy without purpose is to squander one's royal currency. It is like a king endlessly throwing coins into the street, hoping they return to him multiplied. Semen retention, by contrast, invites a deliberate conservation of this currency. The goal is not suppression, but transmutation, redirecting that energy inward and upward. A king knows how to invest his resources wisely. Semen retention becomes the king's wise treasury practice, a commitment to preserving what is precious, using it only when aligned with his vision. One of the most noticeable changes that comes with semen retention is a shift in presence. This is not imaginary or abstract. It is deeply physiological. When a man is not constantly depleted through ejaculation, his body holds on to vital nutrients, hormones, and subtle energetic signatures that influence how he is perceived. The difference is not only in how he feels, but in how others feel around him. People describe men practicing semen retention as more grounded, more magnetic, calm and self-contained, confident without being aggressive, focused and unshakable. These qualities are not the result of physical strength or arrogance. They arise from energetic coherence. When a man is not dissipating his life force, his nervous system becomes more regulated. His eyes become clearer. His voice deepens. His mind becomes disciplined. As a result, he enters rooms differently. He inhabits himself fully. This is the king's presence. No king becomes such by accident. His crown is earned through sacrifice, structure, and responsibility. Semen retention is not for the undisciplined. It requires self-honesty, humility, and consistent refocusing, especially in a culture that celebrates instant gratification and seduces men into constant distraction. This discipline is ancient. Warriors, monks, athletes, and leaders have long known that sexual restraint sharpens memory, enhances strategy, and builds spiritual solidity. To practice semen retention is to step into a lineage of men who refuse to be ruled by appetite, choosing instead to access a higher position within themselves. In many ways, semen retention is not about sexual control. It is about self-control. And self-control is the foundation of sovereignty. To retain one's seed is to acknowledge that masculinity is more than physicality. It is a field of power, purpose, and presence. It is about directing energy rather than being directed by it. The king does not waste his fire. He guards it until it is time to ignite. Men who practice semen retention often report enhanced mental clarity, increased motivation, stronger intuition, and sharper purpose. These are not lofty claims, but the natural byproduct of harnessing sexual vitality instead of losing it. A king cannot rule without purpose. His presence must be tied to a mission. Semen retention aligns a man with that mission by returning his focus to what is essential. Without constant sexual release, the craving for dopamine gives way to deeper satisfaction, meaningful work, honorable conduct, impact. It is not the absence of sex that makes semen retention sacred. It is the presence of intention. The king's presence is not only about power, it is also about connection. A king who is truly sovereign becomes more generous, more attuned, and more compassionate. Women feel safer in his presence, not because he is passive, but because his energy is steady and directed. When a man is addicted to ejaculation or pornography, his ability to connect deeply often diminishes. His focus is fragmented, his attention is shallow, and his interpretation of intimacy becomes sexualized rather than relational. Semen retention rewires this dynamic by reducing compulsivity and increasing capacity for authenticity. The king relates from fullness, not hunger. At its deepest level, semen retention is not just about biology or behavior. It is about psychology and spirit. It demands a man confront his shadows, his attachments to pleasure, validation, or escape. It strips away illusion and asks, who am I without this release? What am I avoiding? What am I capable of becoming? This confrontation, though uncomfortable, is the initiation of the king. Every spiritual tradition speaks of delayed gratification and the redirection of desire. Jesus, Buddha, Krishna, all exemplified mastery over the senses. Semen retention becomes a portal into these deeper mysteries, where the masculine learns to merge power with purity. Spiritually, semen is a carrier of consciousness. To retain it is to gather one's spirit and unify one's mind. It is not repression, it is elevation. Semen retention is not a magic bullet. It does not guarantee enlightenment. It is not an excuse for superiority or shame toward others. There are real psychological, emotional, and physical adaptations that must be understood. Some men may experience sexual frustration, emotional volatility, or increased sensitivity when they begin the practice. Without a process of transmutation, through breath work, exercise, creative expression, or meditation, the buildup of energy can become tense. The point is not to be abstinent forever, but to learn to be intentional with release. Semen retention must be integrated into a whole life practice: clean diet, mental hygiene, spiritual grounding, and physical movement. Otherwise, it becomes repression instead of transformation. A king is not made in a single day. He is sculpted through choice, discipline, and alignment. Semen retention is a tool in this sculpting, a sacred tool that returns a man to himself. By retaining, he stops acting compulsively and starts acting consciously. He stops seeking validation and starts expanding influence. He stops collapsing into lust and starts rising into vision. The king's presence is not loud. It is commanding. It is not performative. It is authentic. It is not force. It radiates. In a world where many men struggle to feel powerful or grounded, semen retention is a rediscovery of their throne. Not as a tyrant, but as a leader. Not as a performer, but as a presence. This path is not for every man. It is for the man ready to stop being ruled by his lower nature, who senses a calling toward his higher self, who understands that sex is not forbidden, but sacred. That power is not taken, but cultivated. That energy is not drained, but directed. The king rises in silence, step by step, as the world around him begins to respond. In a final analysis, semen retention is far more than a physical practice. It is a metaphysical journey of reclaiming one's own throne. The king's presence is the natural emanation of a man who has taken full ownership of his body, his mind, and his energy. He is no longer a slave to his impulses, a beggar for validation, or a passive consumer of life. He is the active author of his destiny. This presence is quiet, potent, and undeniable. It is the calm in the storm. It is the man who walks into a room and changes its atmosphere without saying a word. It is the respect he garners without asking. It is the creative fire that burns brightly within him. It is the magnetic pull that draws opportunities and people of high caliber into his orbit. The crown of this kingdom is not forged of gold, but of integrated shadow and refined light. The scepter is not a rod of office, but an unbreakable will. The throne is not a piece of furniture, but the unshakable core of a man who knows who he is and what he stands for. He is a king not because he rules over others, but because he has conquered himself, and in that self-conquest, he earns the reverence of the world. This is the ultimate promise and the profound truth of the path, the journey from scattered boy to integrated man, culminating in the undeniable, magnetic, and sovereign power of the king's presence. Subscribe to the channel.